Hi, and this is the book that everyone is talking about, Adventures in Navyland. If you're not one of them, it's probably because you don't have your own copy yet. And toward the end of this presentation, I'll be glad to tell you how you can get your copy and encourage others to get theirs too. My book, Adventures in Navyland, I'm former third-class quartermaster Joe Callahan, is an exciting book with 32 great chapters, 185 pages. As you can see, it's quite thick. Got some beautiful pictures in it of when I did my tour of duty on both active duty and in the Navy Reserves. It talks about the many adventures I encountered, and I'd like to share one of them with you right now. This adventure talks about when I first went on active duty, and I was assigned to a destroyer escort, the Robert L. Wilson. I was a third-class quartermaster, supposed to know how to navigate and steer the ship, which the Navy Reserve unfortunately never bothered to teach me how to do, just sent me off on active duty, supposedly knowing how to do that. But while I was on the Wilson, I have an adventure that I call it My Eyesight Comes First. When I got on board this ship, it was getting ready to go to Vietnam, and we were in the yards at Portsmouth in dry dock, and they were chipping the lead paint with what they call needle nose, pneumatic needle nose, and it was air powered, a whole bunch of little metal barbs that would jab at the paint, and it would flake off and fly out in pieces. And as it turned out, they had us chipping the lead paint without goggles, and every so often you would have to stop and take a chunk of that lead paint out of your eyes. Now, you would get hit right and left in both eyes with the big chunks of lead paint, and it would sting. It would hurt when it hit your eye. Sometimes harder than other times. But constantly you were having to stop and pick pieces of lead paint out. Now the reason for this is the first class bosun's mate, who was in charge of the bosun's locker, would hold back on the goggles that they had and hold them for the people that were working under him, and they were called the deck apes. Deck apes were people who had been drafted and had some of the dirtiest jobs on board ship. They worked underneath the bosun, and he would reserve the goggles for them and not give goggles out to anyone else. Well, as it turns out, I had received orders that I was no longer going to be on board that ship. I told my grandmother we're going to Vietnam. She said, "No, you're not. I'm going to pray for you, and you're going to get off of there." I get orders to go to Panama, the Panama Canal Zone, and I helped arrange that ship's transit through the Panama Canal on their way to Vietnam. How's that for the power of prayer? But what happened was I only had a few more days to go on board the ship. And in the course of time of chipping paint without goggles, I wound up trying to read the signal flags on the ship next to us, and it was just a blur. And I had to go over to the hospital at Portsmouth and get glasses because my distant vision had gone kaput. It had really been damaged through chipping paint without goggles. I was angry at myself because usually I'm the kind of man that would take a stand against that. The only reason I didn't is I didn't want the other guys saying, "Oh, he's a sissy." Because they were doing it, I said, well, I may as well do it too. That isn't usually the way that I thought, but I just didn't want to ruin my macho image. So I chipped paint without goggles. My eyes paid the price. Now I found out, here I am, 2 sets of glasses were issued to me, and I couldn't see in the distance clearly. So I decided I will not chip paint again without goggles. So Lieutenant Oliver, the lieutenant was over our division operations, came to me one day, and as it turned out, all the other guys that were in that department with me were off at various schools, at Moran School, damage control, firefighting, various schools, and I'd already been to. And so I was the only one left in the operations department. So when we had reveille in the morning, Lieutenant Oliver said to me, "I want you to go get hose, get needle nose, and go out on the outer edges of the flying bridge and chip paint." So I went down to the bosun's locker. I was the first one there, first one in line. And when he opened the door, I gave him my list. I needed 250 feet of hose, and I needed the connections for them. They came in 50-foot sections. And I had my needle nose, and I had goggles. So he goes and gets me the 250 feet of hose, gets me the connections, got me the needle nose, and then he said, next. I said, wait a minute, you forgot something. He said, what's that? I said, you didn't give me any goggles. And he said, don't have any goggles. Well, I knew that was a lie. And he goes, next. So I pushed him aside and I stepped inside the bosun's locker, and there on the wall was at least 36 pair of goggles hanging. And I said, yes you do, you're mistaken, just give me one of those. And he said, can't do that, those are reserved for the deck apes. And I said, no they're not, it's first come, first served, and I'm here and I want a pair of those goggles. And he said, well that's too bad, you're not going to get any. So I said to him, that's not a good idea. I said, I'm going to ask you one more time, are you going to give me the goggles or not? And he said, hell no. And so I took the hose that was on my arm, 5 50-foot wraps of it, and I dumped it at his feet, and I dumped the needle nose, and I said, well then I don't need this junk. And I started to walk away. And he said, you come back here and pick that up. And I said, are you going to give me goggles? And he said, no. And I said, well then forget it. And I started to walk away. I figured I better walk away, because if I get angry and punch him, there goes my trip off the ship, and there goes my opportunity to be in Panama. So I kept my cool and walked away from him. He said, I'm going to put you on report to the captain. And I said, well that's a good idea. I said, I don't give a damn. You can put me on report to your aunt and uncle and your grandmother for all I care. Without goggles, I'm not shipping paint. So I wound up in the captain's chair up on the bridge, and I was reading a paperback book, and Lieutenant Oliver happened to come by, and he saw me sitting there, and he says, Callahan, what's the matter? Why aren't you chipping paint? Didn't they have any hose? And I said, oh yeah, plenty of hose. Oh, were they out of connectors? Oh no, they had connectors. Needle nose? Were they out of needle nose? I said, no, you had the needle nose. And he said, well then why aren't you chipping paint? And I said, very simple. He wouldn't give me a pair of goggles. He said, what's that got to do with anything? I gave you an order. He said, what's that got to do with anything? And I said, that's got a lot to do with everything. I said, listen, Lieutenant Oliver, I've already messed up my eyes to where I can't see in the distance by chipping paint without goggles. And I'm not going to go blind, not for you or anybody else. Now, he was a guy just out of college, and they promoted him to lieutenant, named officer school, and he was taught that. But I gave you a direct order. And I said, I know you did. And I said, but just stop and put yourself in my place. What would you do? I said, I'm due to go down to Panama in a couple of days, and I want to be able to see it when I get there. And he said, but I gave you an order. And I said, well, I don't mean any respect to you. You get me goggles, and I'll chip all the paint you want. But without goggles, I'm not chipping one more piece of paint, and that's how it is, and you need to understand that. And he looked at me and he says, okay, but don't let anybody know I let you get away with it. I thought, let me get away with it. I'm just standing up for my rights. And this is what you need to do in a situation like this. You need to stand up for your rights. I could have gone blind if I'd have listened to him and chipped without goggles. And so I'd like to tell you how you can get your copy of Adventures in Navyland. This is just one of many exciting adventures that I had. It's available in Amazon.com, CreateSpace.com, also on my own website, www.fireoflovebooksllc.com. And I'm happy to say that Haslam's here in St. Petersburg carries my book. Haslam's is Florida's largest and the world's most unusual bookstore. They have over 300,000 titles in stock, so I would recommend going to Haslam's if you live in the local area. Otherwise, visit my website or CreateSpace or Amazon.com and pick up your copy today. And then you'll see what everyone's been talking about, and encourage others to get a copy too. It makes a great gift. So thank you very much, and I'll be back to see you again sometime later with another exciting adventure from Navyland. Bye.